I like 90s shows. I like Boy Meets World, I like Full House, so when they came out with spin-offs to these shows, naturally I had to watch them. And I quite liked them. Sure, maybe they didn't really capture the magic of the original, but they were still good. And that's why I want to talk about the spin-off of Boy Meets World today, appropriately titled Girl Meets World. Because I remember watching this show when it was on the air, and I remember it being super popular. I remember the reception to the show being almost universally positive. I remember the show becoming the #1 show on the Disney Channel during its run.
That being said, we were still the highest rated show on Disney.
But more than anything else, I remember the fondness that I felt towards the show. And when the show was canceled, I remember there being serious backlash across social media. Y'all know, if you watch my channel, I review wrestling week to week, never missing one show since I started, without fail, not one single show. But when Girl Meets World was canceled, the backlash even dipped into the pro wrestling industry. That's how impactful and important this show was to people. And recently, I've been seeing a lot of shit being said about this show, and I think it's about time I said my piece to defend it, because I love this show and I'm willing to die on this hill. So Girl Meets World is the continuation to Boy Meets World. Now, I'm not going to be talking much about Boy Meets World because this video is about Girl Meets World, and while I do agree that it's not as good as Boy Meets World, I think it still has a lot of redeeming qualities that make it a very good show. Now, I don't think this show is perfect, alright? I'm not insane. This show does have its problems, but my problem with the people that are criticizing this show is that they seem to be getting mad at the wrong things. And I'm going to be going over some of those things in this video, or at least the things that I saw being said about this show. But before we get to that, let me first talk about the things that I personally had a problem with on this show. Now, before I start going into the specifics, I need to say something general about this show. This show is a kid's show, and that's important to keep in mind because it's a major factor for a lot of the specific problems of this show. However, in a lot of instances, this show's demographic doesn't necessarily excuse what it's doing, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. But first things first, let's talk about the writing. Now, the writing isn't terrible all throughout the show, but this show definitely had its moments where you think to yourself, who the hell came up with that one? With some of these lines, you really have to try to avoid cringing at what you're seeing and hearing.
Muy bien, now conjugate. Trabajo, trabajas, trabaja. Excelente, mija! Chewbacca, chewbacca. What is wrong with you?
And the screenplay is also not great either. Like, the characters do the weirdest things sometimes, and there will just be random moments where the characters will break out into song and start singing and dancing. And I would excuse it if this were a musical, but it's not. It's a comedy coming-of-age sitcom that is supposed to depict the everyday life of a growing girl. You know? At least that's what it was for Boy Meets World. Minus the girl part. So when I see stuff like this, I don't think you can really expect me to believe that this is what real-life adolescence looks like. Next, we have the jokes. Now, the humor in this series is pretty hit or miss. There are definitely some moments where one of the characters will say or do something that is supposedly funny, and that laugh track you hear in every sitcom that they're still using to this day for some reason plays immediately afterwards, and you'll wonder what was so funny about that. However, there are some legitimately funny moments, most of which come from the adult actors. When you have a scene with the kids turned adults of Boy Meets World, you have a much better chance of the scene being funnier, to the point where sometimes you can even see that they are barely holding it together.
Ask me who I like more, you or Topanga?
Who do you like more, me or Topanga?
Topanga! Shocked? Surprised? You gonna cry? Well, don't, because that's the way it is, Pally.
And I guess you could say, like, it's because they're adults and they have more experience, because there are some things in this show that I've rewatched that still get a chuckle out of me all these years later.
I've decided to bring in a respected intellect from the North. Now, Eric. Ow!
There are even jokes that the show makes in order to poke fun at itself, which I can appreciate.
Vinny taught you every year and was also your principal?
Yes.
That would never happen today.
We'll see.
And finally, we have continuity. And I don't mean continuity like A doesn't carry over correctly into B. Actually, if you want to talk about continuity in that sense, you could argue that this show's continuity is a little too good.
Being the youngest is really important. You're the one they hold on to.
Or not.
No, I mean continuity like the continuous flow of a story. And for me, it was never more obviously a problem than during the Riley, Maya, Lucas love triangle storyline. Because when they introduce this storyline when the group goes to Texas, they keep it going for 3 episodes, and by the end of the 3rd episode, it's kind of left unresolved. Like, the characters are just as confused about their feelings for one another, save for maybe Riley, and how to deal with them by the end of part 3 than they were when they first realized they had these feelings. And this show doesn't continue this story and capitalize on it. It just launches straight into some other completely unrelated topics. And when we get back on track and we start talking about it again, they once again make minimal progress on the storyline, leave it unresolved, and launch into some more unrelated stories. By the time we finally do get a resolution to this storyline, we are like halfway through the next season. And I'm not saying this is inherently bad, like you can stretch out certain stories to keep your audience hooked until they see the payoff. But the problem is that your audience is going to get a bit frustrated that we're just blowing through these episodes with all these loose ends that have yet to be tied up. At least that's what happened with me, and maybe that's just my impatience talking, but the thing is, I know I'm not the only one who has this problem, okay? Don't lie to me. Now, when you look at all these things, the writing, the screenplay, the jokes, the continuity, I said towards the beginning that this show's age demographic plays a large part into how the show ends up being. So when I say that the writing can be a bit cringy, you can just chalk that up to the show's target audience, right? I'm just not part of the age demographic that this show is geared towards, so that's why it sounds weird to me, right? Well, here's the thing. You can't really use this excuse because there are plenty of examples of kids shows that don't suffer from the same problems. One show that immediately comes to mind is Avatar: The Last Airbender. Yeah, this is also a kids show, but it's expertly crafted with clever writing, hilarious jokes, and a smooth, well-flowing plot. Despite what limitations it may have with its material due to it being a kids show, it still manages to create a sharp, impactful, and overall entertaining product for people of all ages, not just kids. And that's why you can't really use the kids show excuse for the problems that I mentioned before. Now, I know so far I've kind of been railing on this show, and some of you may be confused at what I said before about me loving the show and defending it. But I've always felt that you can still like something while pointing out its flaws. For example, the Amazing Spider-Man duology is widely considered the worst Spider-Man adaptation of the 3 that we currently have. And while I do see why, I still enjoy it immensely, mainly because I just love Spider-Man, and I'll probably love anything that he's in. And that's the thing, I still love Girl Meets World, and I'm going to tell you some of my favorite things about it that will hopefully help you see why I think it's not as bad as people say that it is. I'd say my favorite thing about the show are the messages. Now, Girl Meets World, much like its predecessor, Boy Meets World, dealt with a lot of real-life issues, including bullying, parental abandonment, autism, religion, money, love, social media, peer pressure, feminism, politics. I could go on, you get the idea. But probably the most important concept that surrounds this show is the concept of growing up and the friendships that you make along the way that will help you get through meeting the world. That concept on its own is beautiful, and you can easily branch out into sub-concepts like bullying, social media, peer pressure, and all that stuff, based on that overarching idea of growing up, which this show did. But it's not enough to just touch base with all this stuff. You have to also know how to execute messages with these topics. And initially, when I was writing the script for this video, I was going to put the execution of the messages along with the other problems of the show, like the writing, writing, screenplay, and continuity because this show executes its messages in a way that can be questionable at times. Like this one episode where Farkle finds out he may have Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism. Now, a lot of people like to clown on this episode because of how Farkle's friends treat him when they find out he might have Asperger's.
Narrowed interests, going on about a subject even if the people he's talking to don't have a shared interest.
Check. Farkle, we're interested in everything you're interested in. Belgium 1831.
Stop doing that. He's gonna stop doing that.
And while I do think up to this point the message sent is a little questionable, I think what a lot of people are missing are the things that come afterwards. Things like this line.
Guys, whatever this is, I got it. And I need you to let that be okay.
That line is not there by accident. He's trying to tell you what he feels as a person who possibly has Asperger's and how he wants to be treated. This is a good way to show the stigmatization surrounding certain conditions and how that stigma affects people with those conditions. And I didn't even know this part until I did some research on this episode, but apparently experts were consulted for this episode. Yes, people who study this topic and probably know more than you or I gave the okay for this episode. So honestly, if you're offended by it, that's on you. But when people want to clown on this episode for how they treat Farkle, I think they need to see this scene, which comes right after the scene that you just saw where Farkle's friends are doing research on Asperger's. And look at how Farkle literally extends his gratitude towards his friends for caring.
Thanks for the way you treat me. And thanks for studying all of it.
And how about this scene towards the end of the episode when they introduce a character that actually does have Asperger's after it's found out that Farkle doesn't, and she's welcomed into their friendship group and becomes a more regular appearing character afterwards.
These are my friends, Isadora. They like me for who I am. They make me feel like I could rule the world.
And look at this scene when Riley and Maya confirm that their new friend has Asperger's, and look at how they handle it.
I was diagnosed when I was 5 years old. I struggle with it.
Isadora, I don't think there's anybody we respect more than you.
I'm not like everybody else.
But who wants that?
You people didn't watch the rest of the episode, did you? You just watched one scene out of context, didn't like what you saw, and thought that this show was bad, didn't you? Another episode that people like to clown on is the communism episode. Now in this, the class is given a test and Riley, Maya, and Farkle decide to work on it together. And after getting a 100 or an A, Mr. Matthews gives them a C to sort of distribute the grade evenly among the three of them. Now, despite this not adding up mathematically, the message of this episode was supposed to be a celebration of individual achievement. How in some instances, your individuality and what you can do on your own and how you are as one singular person trumps what you would be if you were always represented by a group. Now, I got a dumb poo-poo brain, so I don't entirely understand the concept of communism, but...
Hey! We all said it at the same time! I'm hungry. What is happening to us?
I'm pretty sure it's not this.
We don't want to become like them. We'd rather remain a free society of individuals.
Instead of whatever the heck that was.
Yo, I'm with you, my man. I don't know what that was, but it sure as hell wasn't communism. But from what I could grasp and from what I've heard, this episode doesn't exactly encapsulate or represent communism in the best way. And I know Boy Meets World was sort of known for this Red Scare stuff, and I guess Girl Meets World too now, based on this episode, but my problem is not so much how they're representing communism, but more the message that is being received. Because, like I said, I'm more concerned about how this show executes its messages. Because I actually saw people trying to convince themselves or each other that this episode was trying to teach you that teamwork is bad. And this is simultaneously the funniest and the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What television network would be okay with a show trying to teach its audience that teamwork is bad? especially the Disney Channel and its young audience. I don't necessarily blame people for pegging this episode as a thinly veiled anti-communism piece of propaganda, because I think that's clearly what it is. I mean, you could tell based on this awkward and hilarious shot of Riley saluting to the American flag. But to think that the message of this episode is that working together is bad is just asinine. Plus, Topanga's actress Danielle Fishel was the one who directed this episode. I mean, are you going to argue with this queen? Because I won't. Next up, we have the religion episode. I seriously think you guys just try to find all the things you're never supposed to talk about, like politics, religion, and mental conditions, and scrutinize it to where one single questionable thing is grounds to rip the whole show apart. Anyways, the religion episode. Now, this episode shows Farkle and Maya not believing in God, Riley and Lucas believing in God, and the clash between the two ideologies. Now, a lot of people have a problem with this scene where Farkle presents his arguments for not believing in God, and guys like Lucas and Mr. Matthews break down his arguments and why they don't hold up. Now, I've seen all the criticism, that his arguments aren't even representative of a person who questions or doesn't believe in the existence of God, that they're not even good arguments, that they're trying to gaslight and bully Farkle into believing something else, and that this show is too pushy with how it leans in one direction of trying to get you to believe in God. And while a lot of this stuff is true, yes, Farkle's arguments towards why he doesn't believe in God, like seeing is believing, and the fact that he doesn't understand how God can keep track of everyone, are not great arguments. And yes, it does seem to lean in a direction where the writers of the show really seem to favor believing in God over not believing in him. But I think, once again, people are missing the message. And this is something that I think I'm noticing with these episodes. A lot of people are taking these scenes out of context and not watching the whole episode to see what exactly the message is that the writers want the audience to leave with. And that message is this.
We're here to discover what it is we want to believe in. And different people believe in different things. But it doesn't hurt to listen to people we love before we decide for ourselves.
Yeah, not such a bad message, huh? And the people at Disney even saw how good of a message this was, because look at what Michael Jacobs said happened when he brought this episode to the table for Disney.
We expected that what was going to happen was that Disney was going to call and say, you can't do this, you go too far. What happened instead was we received a phone call that said, this is the type of thing that we believe elevates our company. Thank you very much.
You guys cannot do this. You cannot just look at one scene out of context and immediately deem this show bad. You have to look at the entire episode and see the bigger picture. And if you're gonna say like, oh, well, why did this scene even need to exist in the first place? Well, because that's how you develop characters. You need to include some of the bad to get to the good. You don't start with the good and then just go to more good. These scenes of uncomfortable and weird dialogue have to exist in order for these characters to grow by the end of the episode. Like, look at this line that Riley says when her friends don't agree with her on what she believes in.
You get everything sorted out?
No, why won't everybody just believe everything I believe?
Like, who the hell talks like this? Of course they put this line in intentionally. Yes, this is a very bad and weird thing to say, but the writers intentionally had her say that so that this way, by the end of the episode, she could change her mentality and learn something new.
We live in a place where we can listen to what others have to say and then make decisions for ourselves. So how can I not do the same for you? Thanks, Riley.
It's the same thing that happened in the autism episode. Yes, they weren't particularly accepting of Farkle possibly having Asperger's at first, but they eventually grew to accept him for who he was, and they even bring in a new member to their friendship group who actually does have Asperger's. I could honestly go on about this, but I think that just about covers the episodes that got dragged the most. I mean, there was a bunch of other stuff that was said, which I thought was really dumb, like the fact that they said that this show promotes grooming, which I'm assuming refers to the Maya-Josh relationship, even though 1, they're only 3 years apart, 2, they're both minors, and 3, they made it abundantly clear that they were going to play the long game and wait until they were both older in the future before they started dating. Or the fact that they broke up Sean and Angela, my OTP. Now, look, I get that people love Sean and Angela together, but people also need to realize that by the time we get to Girl Meets World, Sean's dad and his partner Angela have both left him. He needs a certain stability again with these relationships, and what better way to do that than by having him marry Maya's mother, who shares his pain of having a partner leave, and having Sean adopt Maya as his daughter, who also shares mutual trauma with Sean of having a father leave. It's a way for all these broken people to find stability in these relationships again and lean on each other as one big happy family. And that's just so beautiful.
You guys are going to kill me for what we decided to do with Sean and Angela. But I will tell you that it is right, it is real, and you're going to have to watch the episode 6 times before you put the guns down.
Yeah, you tell him, Michael. Put the guns down.
No effing way. I know my rights.
I honestly don't know what's left to say at this point. I think I pretty much covered just about all the main pieces of criticism and the things that I liked about the show. I mean, the acting is pretty good. Like, when this show wants to get serious, it gets serious. I think my favorite episode of this whole show is probably the forgiveness episode. In this episode, Mr. Matthews assigns his students a forgiveness project, and Maya decides to confront her biggest demon, probably the thing that has haunted her longer than anything else. Her father, who abandoned her at childhood and left her mother to care for her on her own. Something that she hates her father for doing and hates herself for possibly causing. I can't play out the full scene, unfortunately, because I'll get cucked by copyright, but I'll do my best to put in the gist of it.
I know you wanted me to forgive him, but I didn't. I couldn't do it.
I never expected that, Maya. That kind of forgiveness, it doesn't come so easy.
What did you want from me?
Did you forgive yourself?
Oh! Oh my god! Who the hell said this show was bad? You people are high. What exactly do you think is good television? I'ma fight anybody who says that was bad. And that's the thing about this show. Even if the writing might be a bit bad, or the humor might be a bit off, or the dialogue might be a bit questionable, this is still a really good show with beautiful messages, stunning acting, genuinely emotional moments, and overall, this show is just really heartwarming and comforting. I don't know, I might be a bit biased because I am a 90s kid. I'm the same age as a lot of the actors on the show, so I feel like I kind of grew up with them. But I think if you really take a look and stop looking at scenes out of context, I think you could really learn to appreciate the show. I think you could realize that when you get down to it, at the heart of this show, it's very touching and nostalgic and heartwarming. So in the end, I'm going to give Girl Meets World an 8 out of 10. And I think if anybody has a problem with this show, I invite you to go back and watch the episodes in their entirety again to see what exactly they were trying to say. I swear to you, it's probably not as bad as you think.